Multi-Doctor stories have been a staple of Doctor Who for quite some time now, with the basic idea being a bunch of different incarnations of the Doctor coming together to stop some form of evil plot. This idea is usually reserved for things like anniversary specials, though not exclusively, and with us set to get a big multi-Doctor event in 2023, starring David Tennant and Ncuti Gatwa for the 60th anniversary, I thought what better time to rank the multi-Doctor stories than now. But before we do, a couple of ground rules. I'm not going to include anything from audios or novels, because if I did, I'd be here until the year 3000, and I have to cut off the list somewhere. Also, a stipulation for this list is that the Doctors do have to interact at least once. So things like where Clara calls 11 to make sure that 12's actually a decent bloke won't be included on this list because the Doctors themselves don't really interact. And then I'd also have to include things like, I guess, name of the Doctor, and I'm just not going to include that. That's another thing, if they only appear in archive footage, I'm not including that either. They have to actually be in the story. So with the rules out the way, let's get into the list. But hey, if you enjoy regular Doctor Who content, why not consider subscribing? We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we've got just under a month to do it. So if you like this content, please subscribe. It would really help me out. We've just hit 18,000, which honestly, thank you so much. It's incredible. I also have a Twitter and an Instagram if you'd like to follow. The link will be in the description below. But with that said, let's get into the list. In last place, number 7, is something that I never really expected to be talking about on this channel. It's Dimensions in Time, which yes, does meet the criteria I made of has to be televised, as it was televised on Noel's house party as a part of Children in Need, and the Doctors have to interact at least once, which they do mostly in those weird contact scenes, but they do, I guess, interact. So for those of you who have no idea what a Dimensions in Time is, and honestly I don't blame you, allow me to explain it now. The basic premise, trying to explain it as simply as I can, is that a bunch of Doctors converge in EastEnders to stop the Rani from taking over the world. No, I'm not joking, that's literally the plot of Dimensions in Time. The Rani is attempting to create a menagerie of clones of all different species in order to control evolution and I guess also time somehow. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, and sends the Doctor off course to Albert Square so that he can't interfere with her plans. The reasoning for it being Albert Square, honestly, I don't know. I think it's probably budget, but it creates these very weird EastEnders cameos, which I'm sure were hilarious to EastEnders stans in the 1990s, but to anyone else, you're just sort of left scratching your head going, was that meant to be funny?
Well, I've seen them thrown out of the Vic, but never dragged in.
But you have a lot of Doctors included in this special, including 3, 4 via green screen only for some reason, 5, 6, 7, as well as many companions including Susan, Sarah Jane, Leela, K9, Ace, and you think to yourself, this might be decent, and it's not. I think part of the reason is just JNT wrote it, and it doesn't make any sense. Constantly, the different Doctors and companions are glitching out across different time periods, so for some reason the script acts like they're all the same character when they're not. Obviously for the Doctor you can kind of get away with that, but for the companions they have highly different personalities, so it just comes across as really strange. The special is at least, luckily, mercifully short, only clocking in at about 20 minutes in total. It's less of a story and more of just, let's put Doctor Who things on the screen. The whole thing's available to view on YouTube if you are indeed interested in checking out, although I would only suggest doing so while heavily intoxicated. Getting on to actually canon things now. Yes, Twitter, I did say Dimensions in Time is not canon. What are you going to do about it? At number 6, we have the 2 Doctors. Now, I'm going to be honest, the 2 Doctors could have been a home run. It's a Robert Holmes written story with the 6th Doctor and the 2nd Doctor facing off against his own creations, the Sontarans. What could possibly go wrong? Well, for the most part, they just make it exceedingly boring. The first part in particular is so dull. The only things that make it worthy of note at all are obviously the inclusion of Patrick Troughton as the 2nd Doctor and Fraser Hines as Jamie McCrimmon, as well as location filming in Seville. But beyond that, it's an incredibly boring story. It does pick up a little bit in the second half when you get to see the 2 Doctors interact with each other, but it's still an exceedingly slow-paced slog. And this is back when the format for classic Doctor Who at the time was 2 45-minute episodes, and very little happens in the first 45 minutes, so you're just sort of waiting for stuff to happen. The plot, I guess, is that the 2nd Doctor is sent on a mission by the Time Lords, because that's a whole thing that exists, to go and sort out something with a species called the Androgams, which are very, hungry, I guess, beastly entities. and the second Doctor gets captured, and the Sixth Doctor is basically brought in to save his prior self. The second Doctor is also weirdly out of character in this one, because there's like a smart androgyne in the story, and the second Doctor's like, oh, the androgynes can't be smart at all, they have to be silly and stupid and eat things. And also, yeah, there's a scene where the second Doctor gets converted into one of them, and they have like really weird orange eyebrows. It's very strange. The Sontaran, despite it being, you know, on all the covers and stuff, is basically just a henchman to like the androgyne leader lady. But yeah, I think that just tells you all you need to know. A great idea, and it's lovely seeing Patrick Troughton in his final performance as the Doctor, and there are moments in this that are genuinely pretty cool, but overall it just does not hold my attention, which is a shame because otherwise I really like a lot of things about this one. In fifth place, we have something a bit more recent and easy to understand. Twice Upon a Time, this was the final story for Peter Capaldi's 12th Doctor, and sees the reintroduction of the first Doctor, this time played by David Bradley. The premise of this one is that the 12th Doctor encounters his first self, who is reluctant to regenerate as he is, and the whole story is basically about them coming to accept that they need to regenerate. Along the way, they encounter an alien species called Testimony, whose sole job it is to basically catalogue events of the dead. They're not actually bad guys, they just kind of exist. They can also take the form of anyone's memories, so you get to see companion cameos from Bill, Nardole, and even Clara towards the very end. And again, on paper, this sounds quite good. I think it just has a similar problem to the two Doctors, though to a much lesser extent, admittedly, of kind of being a bit slow and meandering. Because the villains aren't actually villains, this story feels quite tensionless to me. They kind of just walk around a lot and there's not a lot actually happening. Also, I know that the first Doctor dialogue is mostly written as a joke and has been said to death at this point, but I really don't like the direction they took the first Doctor's character in. They make him into basically a sexist caricature, which I don't get. Like, sure, it was made in the 60s, but he was never this bad. Also, you have Mark Gatiss playing a distant relative of the Brigadier, who's fighting during World War I, which admittedly does lead to a really nice scene at the end, where you get to see the Christmas Day armistice of 1914, which is honestly the best part of the story by far. So yeah, overall, it's not terrible. There are definitely worse things Doctor Who has pumped out, and even much worse things on this list. But it's not one that I ever rush to go back to. You can tell this was a last-minute addition made to keep the Christmas slot before Chris Chibnall came in, because Doctor Falls does act as a much better conclusion for Peter Capaldi, in my opinion. And I also think that as a result of the first Doctor being back, 12 does get slightly overshadowed, but that's just my opinion on that. Coming in at fourth place then, these are actually the, multi-Doctor stories I'm starting to like now. From Twice Upon a Time onwards, I could watch these with relatively little issue, but of course they do have pretty big issues, hence why they're not higher up on the list. We have The Power of the Doctor. Now, some people might be surprised I ranked this above Twice Upon a Time. Frankly, it's probably just because it has a couple more moments that I like in it. The problem with Power of the Doctor, as I've explained multiple times, is that it is a bit of a mess narratively. It's very fun, and seeing the cameos from all the different Doctors is great, as well as the companions, but it's kind of junk food for the eyes. You kind of look at it and you're like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. The basic premise is that it's the 13th Doctor's final episode, which naturally leads to the regeneration as well, and the Master, being the little devil he is, plans on taking the Doctor's body and making the Doctor force regenerate into him. This leads to scenes in the Doctor's subconsciousness where the past Doctors basically encourage her to fight back, and you also have Ace and Tegan helping out with the Cybermen invasions of Unit, as well as volcano invasions with Daleks. It's a whole thing. Again, it's very junk food for the eyes. The plot is a bit all over the place, but hey, it has some nice moments, especially when the Doctors are interacting, and the scenes with 7 and Ace and 5 and Tegan respectively are lovely. They're done via holograms that the Doctor installs earlier in the story. So yeah, a fun piece of entertainment, but by no means anything particularly substantive. In third place, and I feel like this might be a little bit of a hot take, I'm going to go with The Five Doctors. Now, this used to be my number one choice for multi-Doctor stories, but it's gone down for a few reasons. Number one is that the Doctors don't actually interact much within the story, save for the last, I guess, like sort of 10 minutes where they're decoding that little Omega stone thing. And I also think that as a result of it being movie length and all one part rather than the traditional classic Who thing of splitting stories into like 4 parts or more, it kind of feels a little bit dragged out in places. However, this story also does have a lot of fun stuff in it. You have basically all 5 of the Doctors, kind of. I mean, the first Doctor, obviously, William Hartnell had passed away by this point, so this time the first Doctor role is taken up by Richard Hurndall, and he does a fine enough job. You also get Troughton, Pertwee, Baker, once again, in archive footage form, because for some reason Tom Baker just never comes back for Multi-Doctors, and Peter Davison, the Fifth Doctor, the current at the time, along with many companions including Sarah Jane, the Brigadier, Tegan, Turlough, who are the current TARDIS team, as well as cameos from characters like Jamie and Zoe in sort of projection form, as well as Liz Shaw. You also get Anthony Ainley's Master running around, as well as a Dalek in a hallway, and some Cybermen patrolling the Death Zone. Basically, the premise of this one is that the Doctor's incarnations are being pulled out of time by a mysterious entity and placed in a location called the Death Zone. Dubbed the Death Zone because it's where the Time Lords put, all the different various creatures of the universe, and basically watch them fight like a giant gladiator arena. This, as a result, makes it incredibly dangerous to traverse, and the Doctor's basic plan is to head to the tomb of Rassilon before the mysterious villain of the piece, who is revealed to be Lord President Barusa, seeking immortality, which then backfires, and then he gets stuck as a paving slab for the rest of time. This one is definitely more fun than some of the others. It has some really nice scenes, most notably the one and only time where John Pertwee actually gets to face the Cybermen. As I said, I guess just what lets this one down is kind of its pacing and the fact that the Doctors don't interact as much, which is kind of something I look for in multi-Doctor stories personally. So yeah, for that reason this one is a bit lower. And now we're into my top 2. And at number 2 spot, I think it'll be no surprise to anyone to see this high, it's The Day of the Doctor. Now, even though I say that, and even though I say I think Day of the Doctor is great, this one has kind of slid down in the estimations of many people. I think mostly because it's kind of seen as the new Who special, because you don't really get any classic Doctors in this one like you do with the Power of the Doctor. It's mainly just 11, 10, and a new incarnation played by John Hurt, who is the War Doctor, the Doctor who did that unforeseeable act in the Time War. The premise of this one is that 11, 10, and War meet up via various wormholes constructed throughout time to stop a Zygon invasion through various paintings. Most notably, this is their first appearance since the 1970s story Terror of the Zygons, and come to terms with their grief over the Time War and eventually forgive the War Doctor for the act, and also basically saving Gallifrey at the end. Spoilers. You also get a wonderful cameo from Tom Baker at the end of this one as the Curator, as well as Billie Piper as the Moment, who is basically the bomb that the Doctor is, deciding whether or not to blow up, but has a consciousness and chooses a form from the Doctor's future, Billie Piper, who played Rose, or the Bad Wolf, as she dubs herself in the story. This one, in my opinion, is probably the strongest plot-wise of any on these lists, or at the very least, is the one that I feel like I could put on the most easily, which you might think would make it obvious grounds for number 1. I think there are just a couple of things that draw this one back, though. Mainly, I kind of feel like the whole resurrection of Gallifrey plotline, retrospectively, is kind of pointless. Like, it got destroyed again anyway, and I'm on record as saying I think Gallifrey needs a break, so I'm not really that bothered about it getting restored, and I also think that it kind of does devalue the RTD era just a little bit. I also would have liked to have seen a couple more nods to the past. There are a fair few, and it doesn't ruin the story for me, but it would have been nice to maybe see some more classic characters, even in cameo roles would have been nice. But yeah, this one's very fun. I'd say Power of the Doctor works better as an anniversary special, but Day of the Doctor is by far the strongest script in my opinion, and the better multi-Doctor story, and therefore the best multi-Doctor story of the revival. However, it's not my favourite, because that's right, in first place we have the Three Doctors. Now, I think there's a few reasons why the Three Doctors is on the top of the list for me. Number 1 is that we actually get a lot of interactions between the various Doctor incarnations, including John Pertwee's third Doctor, who is the current at the time, Patrick Troughton's second Doctor once again making an appearance, as well as William Hartnell's first Doctor, mainly appearing on-screen monitor cameos because at that point William Hartnell's health had degraded to such a point where that's all he could do, unfortunately. The villain is also Omega, which is hugely exciting and one of those characters that people have been begging to come back for years, and this is arguably his best iteration. I mean, no one remembers Arc of Infinity Omega. It's all about, the chatty, big masked Three Doctors Omega. The plot of this one, in summation, is that Omega is trying to break out of his antimatter universe that he's in, and the Time Lords enlist the help of the Doctor and their multiple incarnations in order to basically stop him. One thing I will say that this story does kind of contribute to is the beginning of the Time Lords becoming a little bit useless. Like, without the Doctor, they're basically just stuck in front of monitors with no way of, fighting back at all, which is contrasted heavily with the War Games, where they just completely dominate everything. And there's also a really weird fight scene that's kind of inside the Doctor's mind between the Doctor and Omega, which is very strange. But overall, this one's exceedingly fun. You get Joe Grant, the Brigadier, Benton, and this is all when they're current characters. And also, the second Doctor feels like he literally never left. He feels like he's just been plucked right back out from his own era, and it works really well. This story also has quite a nice resolution, with the Time Lords deciding to give the third Doctor his dematerialization circuit back as a result of him helping them defeat Omega, which they're struggling with because their power is being drained via a black hole. Also, the dynamic between the second and third Doctor is by far the best dynamic in a multi-Doctor story. I like 10 and 11 as well, but man, I love the bickering adoration 2 and 3 share. Nothing else matches it. But yeah, that's my ranking of the multi-Doctor stories. Let me know in the comments below how you would rank the multi-Doctor stories. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.